And also, oh, okay. Sorry, I just got the alert of recording in progress Zoom announcement. Anyway, what I was going to tell you is that static web page is quite simple and fast to load. And the reason why is because this logic in this diagram, you only see two arrows are just going back and forth in two directions. Well, it means that the bottom is the server and the above is the user request. So there is the server receives a request for a web page, and then after that server sends the response to the client. And there's not much like additional process in this workflow. You only have two processes, just receiving requests and responding requests. So that's it. It means there's not much like, travel time for, these requests to, first of all, tell server what kind of information users want to take a look at it, and then bring in all the way back to, for the client side. So means like there is, you can see like as a comparison on the right-hand side, which is the dynamic web page. They don't, static web page don't have the, database structure included. So this is kind of like being expected to be used, that pages will remain the same without manual changes. So that's one kind of, I would say, a quick note that you need to keep in your mind, that although static web page is really fast and simple architecture, there is something that you might need to do a workaround if you don't use some specific frameworks or library. Moving on to the dynamic web page, which is going to be a right side of more like numbers of images included diagram. So this right-hand side of dynamic web page diagram obviously like has a lot of processes, more than two directions. So it means that it's quite slow to load, because after users will send, like the request to the server, and then server will need to deal with another like, at least processes to do that. So it's going to take a lot of travel time for, request or response to be returned. So dynamic web page tend to be a little bit slower to load. And the layout or architecture, I would say, how dynamic web page is structured is not simple as static web page. Static web page was just written in markup and JavaScript, but here is, for example, written in Ajax, ASP.NET, etc. So it's a little bit complicated. So it means that quite hard, or sometimes it's hard to maintain, I would say. And it contains the database inside and there. So yeah, and it is used, like where the information is changed often compared to the, static web page. So if you want to change the information dynamically, for example, like such as discount pricing, changing daily, or weather information, or stock price information, etc., then yeah, that's where it comes. Probably the dynamic web page is being used. But yeah, again, like I said, it's quite slow to load from the travel time for the request to be returned as the response. And then that's why we developer were like thinking like, okay, isn't there the way to like serve content in really like fast way from what we have been experimenting. And then people started to realize like, okay, static web page sounds really nice. And in short, they are fast, cheap, easy to maintain, secure, easy to scale, as well as stable. So first of all, I explained quite enough of how static web page is fast, and the easiness to maintain, like the architecture, etc., is also already explained, because it's just simple markup and JavaScript. Cheap means that, well, if there is, let's say, like less workaround, or like less complicated architecture to maintain the way to serve the content, then of course people do not have to work so hard to maintain such kind of architecture. So that's why it's quite cost effective. Secure is because if there is, let's say, like no place to attack, for example, like databases, etc., means backend side, to be honest, there's no other places could be secure. And that's the beauty of, for example, I'm going to explain you later, like what does it mean, headless CMS? But this headless idea is actually from this basis in here. So if you separate, let's say, front-end side and then the back-end side, and then if, let's say, like either one of the places get attacked, and then the other place could be safe. So that's the strategy static web page is kind of considering about. And of course, if it's, actually static web page is meant to be designed for scaling up. So if you have, let's say, like constantly like changing, the content, and if you use the combination of the framework, which handles, to update the content, to cover, let's say, like how static web page was serving the content, like instead of, manually like, updating the content itself, you will be easily able to handle such kind of, let's say, cons of the static web page. Yeah. And as I said, there is a Jamstack based on what we took a look at together between the comparison of static web page and dynamic web page. There is the Jamstack, idea started to come up. People start to take a look more like the idea of, okay, Jamstack, for example, like taking an advantage of static web page and then like handling like in more nicer way. So in short, I wrote a lot, but you don't have to read it again. As I said, in short, it's going to be like, let's say 3 words. It's faster, secure, and more scalable. So that's what actually we saw the comparison between the static web page and the dynamic web page. And Jamstack, let's say, has 2 points to explain more details about these 3 main points: faster, secure, and scalable. So first of all, it's pre-rendering, means that all the front end is pre-built into highly optimized static pages. So for example, the sites can be like served directly through CDN, means content delivery network. So it's enhancing. The other point is that it's actually enhancing with JavaScript, means that if you want to, let's say, like, for example, like put the implementation of third-party, like another like services based on the API that exposes the API, then you can actually easily integrate these outsource of the service into your Jamstack projects. So it means that you can communicate with backend services with JavaScript and API. And of course, it's really fast to deliver and secure with direct serve from CDN. So basically, the content or assets are being cached. So you don't have to make your users to wait what they requested to retrieve the data. So in short, like I said, it's these 3 points: faster, secure, and scalable in here. And this is the diagram. Sorry, I think I should have to show you this before, but that's what everything I was talking about in here. And then there is one of the ways to serve the content, which is called static site generator. In short, it's called SSG. So you might have seen some of the frameworks such as Next.js serves the content by default with SSG. So SSG, static site generator, is something that, for example, like it has like 3 benefits. First of all, in security perspective and scalable perspective, as well as performance perspective. So I can start to explain from the first one, security. So actually, it doesn't have, let's say, like the structure of, let's say, for example, the servers to do all the magic and work around. So it means that, like I said, from the security perspective, there is no place for malicious attack to, like implement malicious code, etc. And that's why it's, even more secure than, the other, let's say, dynamic web page that we use to serve the content with the databases. Means like bind it together with the backend. And for example, like if there's no databases to access, then means it's going to simplify a lot of hosting infrastructure. So the work to deploy your projects, it's going to be much easier than it used to be before with the dynamic web pages. So there is actually another diagram that you can see while I'm explaining you the rest of like 2 main points from the static site generator. So I explained about the security perspective, and the second benefits of, let's say, using this SSG is that it's quite scalable. So as we saw together or heard together that the Jamstack, static site, static web page is quite scalable, is because everything is cached in the CDN and everything is served directly through pre-built site. So the users don't have to wait for longer than 3 seconds, to wait until their content would be served. And it's optimized for scaling by default. So SSG is in the other way. Actually, it's created by default to for scale the projects. So why not to use like something that is already like created to scale the projects? And the third benefits to go through with static site generator is that it's performant. Means simply it's really fast. So like we saw together in the static web page, the SSG took the idea from that, and then for example, the CDN caches the views for content. So you can minimize the travel time for sending the request to the server. So it's going to be quite short time to wait for the response, and you can avoid tons of systems to interact with. So yeah, that's what I would say, like the benefit you can probably get most likely from the SSG. And like I said, there is a couple of frameworks that you can use SSG by default, such as Next.js, and that's what we are going to cover together. And also the other benefit you can use Next.js is that, well, you can, to be honest, it's not going to be a little bit Jamstack, but let me just share with you a quick note. If you want to like change the way to serve the content, for example, into SSR or server-side rendering or incremental static regeneration, ISR, you can actually do that. And Next.js is quite working hard to, improve, to add more options for, developers. So recently they also announced the on-demand ISR, so that you can choose which page to be like, terminate the cache, etc. from the Next.js side. Anyway, but today's workshop is about, mainly Jamstack, and then there's the headless architecture in it. So I'd like to start to explain you what is headless architecture. But before we go into that, there is another, let's say, traditional approach that developers use to, use this technology, and then therefore there's the headless CMS architecture. So content management system is what we call, in short, CMS. It includes actually the monolithic, so-called monolithic. So means that if you use, let's say, monolithic CMS, means that the backend and the frontend side is binded together. So most likely you also need to deal with, let's say, the databases, etc., from your side. And it means that, well, you need to actually follow a certain way of choosing the technology. So you might not be able to have much of the flexibility for, let's say, like by choosing the best framework to enhance the performance of your projects. So that's what I would say, like developers have been thinking a lot, like what we could do better and more. And there is, that's why there's a headless CMS. And as we call this approach as headless, means front-end side and the back-end sides are completely separated, so that you don't, you can actually have all the flexibility to choose any frameworks or libraries or even languages of your choice, so that you can choose the best, let's say, tech stack for enhancing the performance of your projects. It is only possible because as this approach is not binded together with the backend and front end, you will have the flexibility of, like building front end with any kind of technologies. So that's the huge difference between the traditional CMS monolithic and the headless CMS. Yeah. And of course, there are a lot of headless CMSs out there. But the reason why we chose Storyblok for today's talk is not just simply because we both, me and Facundo, are from Storyblok. That's not interesting and fun to hear. And to be honest, we both have a strong reason as developers. So that's what I'm going to actually show you or explain you the methodology of the atomic design shortly after. So Storyblok is first of all based on this methodology to design the system so that you will be able to reuse a lot of components without, duplicating the amount of the work you need to do. So that is quite being widely used. And also I got a lot of feedback from the customers we have that they really like to do that, not only just from developers, but yeah, mostly like, for example, the business users such as marketers, content editors, they really love this kind of approach as well. So yeah, that's one of the reasons we chose. And we have the real-time visual editor. So what I mean by that to say is that, well, you will be able to actually see what exactly real-time visual editor means by, while Facundo is going to take you to the, the demo part, you're going to see real-time visual editor in an action, but in the same one screen, basically you will be able to see what you're going to make the change and how the content is going to be changed with less effort in configuration in that. So that's why we chose Storyblok in this case. And of course, after we discovered together the fundamentals of, okay, what is Jamstack, what is the benefit of Jamstack, and what is the headless architecture, and we need to have a place to deploy our projects. So that's why we are going to also show you how to deploy this workshop blog project into one serverless platform, which is going to be a Vercel. Also, the benefit of using Next.js could be part of it, because Next.js already has, let's say, or Next.js is already like created from Vercel itself. So you can have a hosting service like on the fly. So you don't have to, search around and then think so hard like, okay, which platform could be better? You don't have to search around that. There is actually Vercel already available. And then if you want to take a look at the sources from what I talked so far, there is the sources available from here. And I bet this presentation is in public. Is that correct, Facundo? Okay, so then we can share the slides after that. Yeah, all right. Then moving on to atomic design, which is going to be another slide of mine. So
1 second, Arisa, I share in the chat some links. I mean the site up and running, the code of the project that we are going to see, and after that a recap page of Notion that you can take a look. It's public, where you can see interesting links to, for instance, Arisa's Twitter account or my account, but also some of the material that we are using in the workshop, like the slides that Arisa just shared, or videos related to other talks that we presented related to Next.js, the book about atomic design, and other things.
Thanks a lot. I should have shared with everyone earlier, but thanks.
No,
Facundo.
no worries, no worries.
Yeah, so you can actually find all the sources available from this Notion link, which Facundo just shared with you in the Zoom chat. So you can easily take a look at it. And again, it's in public, so don't worry about like permission from us. You can, everyone can take a look at it from here. So yeah, thanks. And then I'm going to move on to the atomic design. So as I mentioned earlier, we chose, first of all, Headless CMS, with using Storyblok. And one of the biggest reason is because, well, it's based on the atomic design theory. But I'm quite sure that atomic design theory is, of course, it doesn't mean that familiar for everyone. Sometimes like you have a lot of things that you haven't discovered yet. And I also wasn't aware of atomic design, like some time ago. So I'd like to explain you quickly what atomic design is and why is it so good. So there is the video source available, but instead of showing you just the video in here, I can show you and explain you what is it about. But there's the source available from the Notion page that we showed you just quickly before. So atomic design is something that, well, you can see on the right-hand side, there are 5 elements in there. So simply atomic design is a methodology to design system of components. So it's not the methodology for, design in web design or stuff like that. No, it's simply made for organizing components. So that's the one thing I want you to remember about. And to organize, all these components in a nice way to fit into a system, there are 5 elements. So there's 8 atoms and molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. And of course, this diagram doesn't tell you what are these elements exactly. So that's what I'm going to show you one by one. So I'm going to start from the most small, I would say, level of the component. So atom is the smallest, let's say, the level of the element in here. So atom is something that you can imagine it's equivalent to HTML tags, such as labels for the forms or input, as you can see in the right-hand side, and the button in right-hand side too. So all these small each HTML tags are something that you can call atoms in atomic design world. And moving on to one step bigger scale of the atomic design element. So we broke down before into, let's say, these search component into 3 atoms. But in here, all these 3 HTML elements or atoms are grouped together to consist one component. So that's what is called molecules. So this is a little bit one step ahead to, let's say, organize or structure some kind of, component. But still, this one molecule itself does not let's say, give you or show you for example, entire, let's say, page of the architecture. So that's what you will need to bind together into structure another bigger size of the groups of the elements in there. But molecules are second bigger. I would say in the next step, I would say the next level from what atoms are based on. And then if molecules are bind together to structure let's say, so-called kind of this size of the component, then you can call these as organisms. So a molecule itself was much smaller, for example, only the right-hand side of the search components. And it could be also the navigation of home, about, below, contact being displayed in here, etc. And if you combine these organisms, then it's going to be templates. So this is something you can imagine that there is no real content being, displayed in here. But if you insert these real content in there, then that's what we can call in atomic design world pages. So Storyblok adapted this idea a lot. You will be able to organize your components from smaller, let's say, atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. So that's the way to, that's the way for you to organize your components to be able to, reusable as many as you want to do that. And there are a couple of reasons that, of course, some people might question us, okay, now we got the concept of the methodology atomic design, but why we should go for atomic design? Well, first of all, I've been keep saying that reusable, but you're going to see how reusable it is in the demo that Facundo is going to show you. So I'm not going to explain too much about that, but it's, for example, if you don't, let's say, organize components in some sort of systems, then you're on your own to, let's say, be aware of what kind of components you created before for what kind of, let's say, pages or entries, etc. And it's going to be so hard to keep track on, everything in an order. That's why we rely on, or it's easier to rely on this methodology, because there are some certain systems. So if you're aware of these systems, then all you need to do is need to follow how it's organized into the systems, and you can just simply use whatever you need of your choice. Yeah. And if you organize, these components in a system, that it has the pattern, then it's going to be easier to maintain and organize. As well as if you want to scale your projects into a bigger, for example, like enterprise scale, you will need some kind of, let's say, like a pattern to organize these numbers of components. And you want to avoid like duplication of creating the same kind of components. And that's what atomic design works the best. And again, this is based on what Atomic Design ebook is explaining us or showing us. So if you want to take a look at the ebook from them, you can easily see from there. It's totally free, and it's highly recommended to read that. And there is the YouTube, a very short, like I think it's under 30 seconds of video explaining what I was actually showing you. Pretty much similar concept in there. And there is the blog post if you prefer to read the material. And next up is the intro to Storyblok. So that's where I'm going to take you to the next. So,
sorry, Arisa, I wanted to interrupt you 1 second to ask if there's any question about the Jamstack itself or the atomic design concepts that Arisa shared. That I think that your explanation was super clear, Arisa, but just double checking if there's any question by now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Facundo.
No worries, no worries. I would say we are good to go.
Okay. Okay.
Or we have shy people, or everything was clear.
Yeah, and don't worry about like, if we go like too fast or something like this, you can always like write your questions or opinions in the chat. So either one of us, me or Facundo, will take care of it. Yeah. All right, thanks for double checking, Facundo. And it's quite important to make sure everyone is in the same page. Yeah, so I assume we are on the same page, and let's move on to the intro of Storyblok. So first of all, to use Storyblok, you can go to storyblok.com, this website. And if you don't have an account yet, here is where you can sign up. And here is where you can log in if you have an account like me. So in this case, I have already logged in. So you can see this, I am like choosing one of my projects. And at Storyblok, we call projects as spaces. So right now I'm showing you my space that I'm working on in here. And at Storyblok, the intro to the Storyblok in here, I want to show you how we adapted the idea of the atomic design. So based on what we took a look at together from the atomic design on the slides, here is what I can show you in here. On the right-hand side, you see the components being displayed in here. But with that, you cannot maybe tell like, okay, what is nested and what is not nested? What is atom? What is molecule? What is templates? But from here, if you click the search blocks, you can actually see that, okay, there's the teaser in the root or the top level, and there's the grid in the same level. And inside of the grid, there are feature components, like being stored inside. So you can tell from here that grid component is some kind of a parent component that it can contain another components inside in here. And atomic design, I didn't use the word of nestable or something like that, but in atomic design, you can basically like nest a lot of smaller scale of the components. So starting from pages with real content in it, and then next step is templates, right? Without the real content in there. So you can apply these templates into a lot of different pages, sharing exactly the same templates. And moving on to like smaller scale, for example, like organisms, molecules, and atom. So all these ideas are based on, to be honest, nestable components idea. So that's what we have in here, for example. And as I was explaining you the templates, also like nestable components, that's what exactly you can see these terms when you are going to create the components at Storyblok. So if you go to, let's say, this block library icon, and by the way, this user interface UI you're taking a look at right now is our brand new V2 beta. So in this V2 beta UI of Storyblok, you see this block library icon. And from here, you can easily define or create the components that I was explaining based on the atomic design methodology in here. So if I want to create, let's say, another field types, I can easily type out the name in here. Let's say like name, and from here I can easily choose the different field type depending on what I want to assign this field type. And in this case, if I just want to, let's say like, for example, text area, assign text area to define this field type, I can easily do that and then click add. And of course, inside of this body component, it contains teaser or grid or all the components that we took a look at together on the right-hand side of the sidebar in here. And for example, if I want to create new block, means components, now you see content type means actually templates from Atomic Design. So if you want to create a template for defining, let's say, the layout of this page, you can actually do that from here. And if you want to, let's say, create a nested, means smaller scale, such as atom, molecules, or organisms, kind of levels of component, you can easily define one by choosing this nested block in here. So if I, let's say, like define this component as nested block, and for example, decide the component name as contact and add block, then I can start to store the smaller, let's say, atom, molecules, organisms, levels of the elements inside in here. So if I want to do that, address, and let's put it as rich text in this case, then I can easily contain the smaller atoms inside of this contact template in there. And that's how you will be able to create components at Storyblok. And if you want to use this contact, let's say nestable components in many places, let's say different pages, etc., and you can easily call one, or you can easily choose one from block libraries. And that's how you can see, some of the elements, or a lot of elements are adapted from the Atomic Design to organize the content. And I talked quite a lot again. So for now, I would probably pass the ball for the rest of the demo to Facundo, so that after you have all the knowledge and the fundamentals of starting from Jamstack, and then there is the Atomic Design, and then the Storyblok intro, then I think you will be able to understand pretty much easily what Facundo is going to show you. And let's get, play around with in an action instead of just hearing, So yeah. All right, then stage is yours, Facundo.
Cool, thank you, Arisa. So I will share my screen now. Let me, I think I lost, yeah, there we go. Sorry, it was Zoom. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So what we are going to build today is a blog platform. And this blog, well, I mean, as Arisa shared before, I'm right now on Storyblok. I created an Storyblok space for this blog with the components and all the content structure that we are going to use, following the same Atomic Design that Arisa just shared. What I'm going to do now is to give you a link that you can use. Let me share in the chat. This link, you can use it to duplicate the space or create a duplicate of the space that I'm going to use for this example. So you don't have to be creating all the structures from the ground, right? I mean, you can go here to the components list. This is all the list of components that we are going to use in our blog site in our example. And you can come here, edit all of them, or create new ones if you need it. But what I wanted to do now is just share with you this template of Storyblok space that you can use to start with this base of structures and content that we can use if we go to the content now and we visit the home page. I'm using the version 1 of Storyblok. Arisa showed you the beta version of the Storyblok V2 that we are working super hard to get it done, but I will keep with the version 1 because there are some of the features that I'm going to use, like the configuration of the space and etc., that is not fully ready in the version 2 of Storyblok. So I will keep with the version 1, but the idea is the same. I mean, we have here, you can see now that I'm pointing to the URL of the deployed version of my website, the one that we shared at the beginning of the workshop. I'm pointing to the page, and this is the blog that we are going to create. You can see that we have a home page with a header. This header has some links that are pointing to different pages, and we have this teaser that has a title and an image, and here we have different components. We have a grid of features there, and we have icons and different details for all of them. We have a list of related posts. These posts are links to the post detail pages that we have. And the idea is that we replicate this same example and make it work, of course. And with make it work, what I mean is not only that we deploy it and it's working, but also that we are able to connect it to Storyblok, so we are able to edit it from the inside. Right now, you can see that I'm pointing to the deployed version. And if I click in any of the components that we have here, I mean, we have, again, a component teaser, grid, and feature post. If I click on them on the visual editor or on the right-hand side, we are loading all the information related to these components, all the fields that we have for those components, like the ones that Arisa was created. And we can come here and change the value of the components and the properties and see in real time how it would look like in the case that we publish all the changes. So we are giving the content editors and the marketers the possibility of coming here and edit the properties and the components and create new content. You can see that I click on the grid and we are loading the list of features here on the right-hand side, but I can also click on a feature. And again, I can change the value of each one of the properties and see in real time how the page would look like in the case that I publish it right as it is now. So again, the goal of this workshop is not only having the blog working and consuming content from Storyblok, but also the idea is to give the possibility to the content editors and the people that is going to manage the content to have this real-time experience inside the Storyblok application. So I will go back here because I don't want to change the information. As you saw, I was pointing to the deployed version of the page, but what we are going to do now is create a very similar version in my local host so we can point to my computer, which is something that is also allowed using Storyblok, and we can use the real-time visual editing experience with the Next.js application that I'm going to create now. So let's go to the terminal in our computer. What we are going to do now is create a Next.js application from scratch. And to do that, what we are going to do is first, I will move to a folder that I have that I used for coding projects, which is called code. And inside this folder, what I'm going to execute, I don't know if the font is big enough, but I'm going to execute npx create next app. This is a command line interface that Vercel team, I mean the team that created Next.js framework, offers us to have the possibility of creating the structure of a basic Next.js application. So I will click yes now. We are downloading and installing some files, some packages that we are going to use in our application. We have to put a name to the project. I will call it CTJS workshop. So now we are installing dependencies that Next has, like React and React DOM, because just for you to remember, Next.js is a framework that is based on React. I mean, you will see that we will be managing not only JavaScript code, but also React code, because it's like a meta framework of React. And now, I mean, you can see after a couple of seconds, we have the project ready. I will move to Visual Studio Code because this is my preferred my preferred integrated development environment. You can use the text editor that you prefer or the way that you prefer to work with JavaScript and React. I'm going to open the folder that I just created here, the City.js workshop. And now you can see that here we have the basic structure of a Next.js application. I'm going to open a terminal here because we will use it later. I don't know if the font is big enough or if you prefer it a little, whoop, wrong shortcut. Here we have.
This looks good. Yeah, this looks
cool.
Good.
We have a bigger font here, so it's clear for all of you. So whenever we create a new Next.js application using the command line interface, we get all these files generated for us. This is a very basic Next.js application where you can see that we have the general folder structures that we are going to manage for, let's say, all the Next.js project that we can create, or at least a starting point for them. And we have different files like the README file or the package.json, which is the configuration that we will use to install more packages that we will use for our application. The next config file that we can use to add some configuration to the whole application that we are going to create. But the most important file or folder that we will have is this pages folder, where we will have all the pages on all the JavaScript files related to the pages that we are going to manage in our application. As Arisa mentioned before, Next.js offers us different ways of generating the content and generating the markup for our websites, for our projects. We have server-side rendering in the case that we want to generate the content dynamically for each visitor in our website. We also have static site generation, which is the approach that we are going to take today to generate static version of all the pages that we have, so they are available for the users to visit our website in a faster way, more secure, and with all other benefits that, again, Arisa mentioned before. And Next.js offers us the possibility of selecting the rendering method for the content and the markup that we are going to generate based on each page. So today we are going to use a feature that is offered by Next.js, the framework, called a dynamic route that will help us to generate all the pages that are going to be part of our website at build time, creating these static assets, this static site generation process that will generate our website. But in the case that we want to use server-side rendering, we are able to do that in a page-based, based in each page. We can use one server-side rendering in one page or static site generation in another page, etc. Another cool feature that that Next.js offers that we are not going to use today, but you can take a look, is the API routes. You can have serverless functions running in the same project. So if you need to run something on the server side that has to apply some logic and generate some results, you can do that using the API routes that Next.js offers. As I said, we are not going to have API routes today, so I will remove this folder and I will keep these two. This underscore application file is the one that we will use to apply configurations or behaviors that is going to be there for all the pages of our website. So in the case that we want to apply some global behavior, this will be the place. And this index file is the root for, in our case, the home page of the project. That is why it is called index.js. Next.js uses to generate all the pages and generate the URLs of these pages, the folder structure that we are using. So depending on how we name the folders that we will have in our project, and depending on how we name the JavaScript files that are going to be contained in this pages folder, it is the URL that we are going to generate for those pages. So in this case, as this index.js file is right inside the pages folder and not inside any other one, That means that if we visit our homepage, this will be what we will see. Let me show you that the package JSON, again, has some dependencies here, React DOM, React, and Next. As we saw before, we have some S-link for configuration, and we have these scripts that are going to be executed whenever we want to run our project. We have the next dev command that we are going to use to run a local version of the server on our computers with some features that will help us to work in a faster way, like hot reload, which means that whenever we introduce a change in a file, we are going to reload the page and show the new version on the browser. But the ones that we are going to use today, which are interesting, are the next build command, which will generate all the static assets for our website, all the pages for our website, and the start command that will start a new Next server in our computer as if it were a web server. So we will get all the static assets generated using the build command, and we will run a new server using the next start command. That is what I wanted to mention before. If I use it now, you can see that if I run npm run build, we will execute some task, and Next will validate all the pages that we have in our solution and will generate the static assets or the static pages for our solution, depending on the pages that we want to manage. In this case, you can see that the only page that we have is the root, which is the index.js file, and it is a static file automatically rendered as a static HTML. That means that if we run the npm run start command, we will start a server on the local host that we can visit. And if we go now to localhost, we will see this page, which is the one living in pages index.js, which is the home page that Next.js generates initially for our project. So this is all the code. Again, what you can see is that this page is a static asset that was generated once at build time, and that is available for all the users or all the visitors of our website. So when they come here, they won't have to wait for the server to generate dynamically the HTML content, but what it is going to do is to offer this static version of the page that is already available. So what I'm going to do now is close this and start using the repository that we shared before as an example to start adding the code, and we can start talking about the code that we are adding and analyzing it so we know what we are doing. First of all, what I want to do is to install a library that we are going to use to add format and style to the markup that we are going to generate and to the React components that we are going to generate. And to do that, what I'm going to install is Tailwind CSS. Tailwind CSS, if you don't know it, I recommend you to take a look because it's a very interesting CSS library that you can use to manage utility classes to give format and style to the markup that you generate in an easier way. And you can create design systems using Tailwind CSS. So I'm going to install the base Tailwind CSS and other packages that I need to make Tailwind CSS to work. So I will run this command. There was a message. Oh yeah, thank you, Arisa.
No, it's just me, yeah.
No, cool. I encourage you to visit the Tailwind CSS page, because what we are going to do today is reuse some classes that were created for this example that we are going to see. But I encourage you to take a look because you can create advanced frameworks or advanced design systems using Tailwind CSS, because it has a lot of features and a lot of possibilities to create these dynamic design systems to reuse in your applications. So after I install all the libraries that I need for Tailwind CSS, I will run this other command, npx Tailwind CSS init, which will generate some configuration files that we will use to add some configuration related to Tailwind CSS. We have these two files that were generated, and I'm going to add some values here that I have from my project. I mean, just to add some format. It is not something that, I mean, again, you can spend some time investigating or learning about Tailwind CSS, but now the idea is to go straight to the point of learning about Storyblok. So what I'm going to do now is replace this code. I will add this configuration that is used for Next.js projects. So we generate the CSS classes that we are going to use in all our pages. And I'm installing some interesting fonts that we are going to use to generate the content of our pages. What I'm going to do now is to copy the fonts because those are not available by default. So I'm going to enter to this public folder and I'm going to copy this new folder with the fonts that we are going to use. That you can see here are the ones that we are using in our example. So this is some basic configuration that we are adding. We have to go to the other configuration file that was generated by Tailwind CSS. I will go to the post CSS config file. And again, at this configuration, we are using some packages and presets that will make our work easier to work with these CSS classes that we are going to use in our React packages. So after that, what I'm going to do is I will go to this styles folder where we have the CSS code that was initially generated by Next.js starter. I mean, these are the classes that the index file was using, but we are going to remove these files because what I want to use now is what Tailwind CSS will generate for us. So what I'm going to do now is to go to the to the styles folder, and as I remove all the files, I'm going to create a new file called Tailwind CSS. And in this Tailwind CSS, what I'm going to copy is some imports and configuration that Tailwind CSS will use to, again, generate the CSS files with the final version of the CSS classes that we are going to use in the code of our application. So we can say that that's all what we need related to the CSS configuration. Again, it's not the goal of the workshop. I encourage you to go and read and learn about Tailwind CSS. Right now, the only thing that I wanted to do is to add some style to the page that we are going to create. As I mentioned before, we have this _app file where we are applying things that we are going to use in all the pages that we will have on our project. We are pointing to a file that doesn't exist anymore because, again, I just removed it. So what I'm going to do is, instead of using styles global CSS, I will put here the Tailwind CSS file that we just created. So now we should be confident that all the code and all the markup that is generated for our website will have all this CSS styling. So those are all the things that we are going to do related to the style and the format of our project. What we are going to do now is install one NPM package that will make our work easier to work with Storyblok. I want to tell you that what we are going to install now and use now is pretty new. It's just, we just released it. So if you go and install NPM install at Storyblok/JS, we are here installing the new JS SDK that we created for Storyblok that will allow us to connect to the Storyblok application. We will take a look later on how it is done. But what I can tell you is that with this new SDK that was released a couple of weeks ago, we are making the integration between Storyblok and any JavaScript framework. I mean, not only Next.js, but also React, Gatsby, Vue, Svelte, Remix, Atom, whatever framework that you want to use. We are making the integration with Storyblok pretty easy. You will just need to add a couple of commands in the code of your application to connect to Storyblok, and bring the content of your space and all the content that you are creating to your application. We will take a look later on how to do that, but you will see that it's pretty easy. And another sneak peek that I can give to you is that we are working on a React specific SDK that we are going to have with more features, and it will make the work easier, even easier, to connect a React project to Storyblok, a React or Next.js project or Gatsby project. So we are working on that, and it will be released very, very soon. So keep an eye on our social networks because you will have the news about that. By now, the only package that we need to connect our Next.js application to Storyblok is this Storyblok.js package. I'm going to install other packages that we are going to use. One of them is marked, and the other one is the Storyblok rich text React rendered. These two packages are going to be used to connect to the rich text properties that we are going to have in our project. As Arisa mentioned before, and she showed before, we can have different field types inside Storyblok. We can have rich text field types. So with these two packages, we are going to make the work easier to render the rich text that we can have in our components. So we already installed all the packages that we are going to use in our application. We are ready to go to the code itself that we are going to create. First of all, what I want to create is a utility file to have all the Storyblok related code inside of it, so we can import the code of that file in all the pages and the components that we are going to have in our application. So to do that, what I'm going to create now is a file called Storyblok, but to do that, I will create a folder first called lib, and inside this lib folder, I will create a storyblok.js file where we will implement all the configuration related to Storyblok. So we write it only once, and we can use it in all the pages and components that we will have in our application. This is the code that we will need in our file. I want to show you, we can talk about it. I'm importing useEffect and useState React hooks here because we are going to use them. And from this Storyblok.js package that I mentioned before, we are going to import some functions. Storyblok init that will allow us to init the connection between our project and the Storyblok application. I mean, this will connect our application to the Storyblok bridge, which is the one that will allow us to view our application inside the real-time visual editor of Storyblok. So this init will initialize this Storyblok bridge, connecting the code of our application to the Storyblok space, so we can see our application inside the visual editor, but we also have the possibility of editing the content and seeing in real time how it's looking. We are using this API plugin because what we are going also to initialize here is this Storyblok API client that we will see later, which will allow us to connect to the Storyblok API and retrieve content from the Storyblok API. So we have two main parts that we can separate here. One is the real-time visual editing experience, and to do that, we are going to use this Storyblok bridge. And on the other hand, we will have an API client that we can use to retrieve content from Storyblok and use it in our project. Finally, we have this function called use Storyblok bridge, which is the one that is going to link the content of the page that we are seeing at the moment with the Storyblok application and enabling this editing experience to the content editor. So let's see how we are using these three components that we are importing from the Storyblok.js package. Here we are executing the Storyblok init function and bringing the Storyblok API client, which is the one that we are going to use to, again, retrieve content from the API. If we want to include and bring the API client, we have to use this use parameter and include the API plugin. If we remove this, we won't retrieve the Storyblok API client, and that is in the case that we only want to use the Storyblok bridge to connect to the application, but we want to retrieve content from the Storyblok API using another package or a different way, or if you want to manage the content in a different way. So I will include it. And on the other hand, the most important thing here, I mean, besides having the, oh, sorry, I forgot to turn off the notifications. The other, I mean, besides having the API plugin here and the Storyblok API client that we are going to use to connect and bring content from Storyblok, what we need to do is to configure a connection to the correct Storyblok space. So to do that, we are configuring this access token, and I'm setting it here. This access token can be found if you go to Storyblok and you go to the settings tab here. You will see that we have an API keys tab. And if I go here, we have different API keys. The one that I'm using now is the preview one because it's the one that allows us to work with the visual editor and edit the content. But the one that you will use for your projects and for the production environment is this public one, because it only gives you access to retrieve information and you can use it to expose it to the public. So bringing this preview token, I'm configuring it here. Of course, this is not secure at all. What you are going to do in your case is adding this token in an environment variable or a secret place where you can only access from the web server and not exposing it in the code of your application, of course. So here we have the Storyblok init function. We are calling it. We also have the Storyblok API client available here. Now, what I'm going to do is to create this kind of React hook called use Storyblok, where we will receive a story here. Story in Storyblok is the way that we call a content unit. To make it easier to understand by now, we will say that a story is a page in our website. So this use Storyblok hook will receive all the content and the information related to one page. We will use the use state hook here to set the context for the page that we are visiting with the information related to the page that we are visiting. And we will use this function, use Storyblok bridge, to generate the bridge, or sorry, instantiate the bridge of a Storyblok between the page that we are seeing and the Storyblok real-time visual editor. The format of the use Storyblok bridge function that you can see if you go to the GitHub repository of the Storyblok.js package here, you can read about it, but the format that we are going to use is sending the page and the ID that is coming from Storyblok and a function that we are going to use to update the context of the page that we are visiting. And besides that, if we have any relation in our story or our page, we can add how the relation is going to be resolved. Finally, we are using the use effect React hook to, again, set the story to the context of the page that we are visiting now with the original story that we are loading. And after that, return this modified story to the page so we can use this story that is linking to the real-time visual editor using the Storyblok bridge in the code of our application and manipulate it to render the correct content related to the components that are coming from the API. I want to go back to Storyblok application because I want to show you so you have an idea of what we are talking about. This is the home page. The home page has, the page is a story of type page, but the story is also a component, a big component that has a body field, and this body field has a list of other components. So what you can see here is that we have a teaser component, a grid component that has other components inside of it, of type feature. So we have three features which are also components with their properties. Like if I enter here, you will see that this feature component has a name property, a description, and an icon. So what you can see here, and probably you are starting to see, is that we have this nested architecture of components. So we have a page with other components inside of them and with other components inside of them. And this is where the atomic design principles start to make sense, right? I mean, the page that we are seeing, this story that we are seeing, is an instance of a template or a content type following the same concepts that we use for atomic design. And we have molecules or organisms inside our page that we can reuse not only in this same page, but also in other pages of our website. If you want to see how the content that we are manipulating here in Storyblok looks like, or you want to see what you're going to retrieve from the front end of your application, you can go here on this arrow and you can open the JSON version of this story. We have a draft or the published, depending on if we want to see the edited version of the page that we are working on now, or the last published version, which is the one that is living in production. But I want to enter here to the JSON because, I mean, what Storyblok is really creating and manipulating is this JSON structure. As a Storyblok is a headless CMS, we are not going to edit the format or HTML markup related to your page. I mean, all of that will be handled by the front end of your application, in this case, our Next.js application. What the Next.js application is going to retrieve is this JSON object that has a name, that has a content. This story has a content, and this content has a body property with an array of components. These different components, you can see that have a component type. We have here the teaser, which is of content type teaser, sorry, component type called teaser. And we have the other properties of the other fields of the component. Like we have here the headline, we have the image of the teaser with different fields. We have also here the component grid that has columns. These columns is an array of columns of features, components of type features, as we saw before, which has a name, which has an icon, which has a description. So you can see that we have these nested components with all the fields of each one of them. And these components are the ones that we are going to represent as React components in the front end of our application. So in our front end, we will have a list of React components that will link with the components that we have in our Storyblok space. We will see that later and it will make sense, but let's keep with this idea. So moving on, we have this Storyblok.js file where we have all the code related to the integration of Storyblok in our project. I will close this. And what I'm going to do now is to create what I mentioned before, the dynamic route that that Next.js will offer us to generate all the pages for our website. So I'm going to this pages folder, and instead of having only one page, the home page of my project, which is the index.js file, what I'm going to have is a dynamic route. That this is the notation that we will use for dynamic routes, is 2 square brackets, 3 points, which is the spread operator. I will put the slug here and again the 2 square brackets. So what this is going to do is to consider or handle all the routes that are, I mean, all the URLs that we will have in our website that are inside this dynamic routing concept. So whenever a person comes to our website, as this is the only file that we are going to have with a dynamic route, this slug property is the one that we are going to grab to manage and see which page the user is visiting. In the case of a static site generation, this slug is going to be each one of the URLs that we have available in our website, in our project. Let's see the code of how the pages are going to be generated, because it probably will make more sense. I'm copying the code here. Sorry, do you have any question? I see that there are some comments in the, oh, cool. Thank you, Arisa, for sharing. No, it's okay. Great. And in fact, it's super cool that you shared that, so you can read more about dynamic routes. But the idea behind the dynamic routes is to generate different pages based on the logic of only one file. So in our blog site, if you see here, I mean, if I go to Storyblok, Next, Workshop, Vercel, we have the home page here. We have the blog page, which has the list of blogs. We have the about page, which is pretty similar with different content. These blogs, we can visit each one of them. And you can see that we have different pages with different content, but all of them are going to be generated following the same logic of this dynamic route. You will see how. Here we have the dynamic route. We import React because this is a React page or a React application. We will have a general layout component, and we will have a dynamic component that we will see later what it means. And here we have the lib that we created before. We are importing the Storyblok API client and the use Storyblok hook that we mentioned before. In Next.js, you have this main function, which is the one that is going to generate all the markup, all the HTML markup for the page that you are visiting. This page is receiving some parameters, and based on those parameters, it will execute some React code that will generate the HTML markup for the page. We receive the information related to a story, I mean the story that we are visiting or the story that we are loading. Based on that, we execute this use Storyblok function that we created before, and we will receive a new story, the one that is linking to the Storyblok bridge now. And with this story, we are going to load this layout, which is a React component and a main structure for our page. And inside of it, we are going to load this dynamic component, sending the content of the story that we are loading. We saw before here that we have a story that has the content. So what we are sending to this dynamic component is all the content of the story that we are visiting. Keep with that idea in mind because it will make sense later. We have this get static props function that is going to be executed at build time to generate all the static assets and all the static pages for our website. So inside this function, we will get the slug or the URL of the page that we are visiting. If we are visiting the root folder, we will load the home story or the home page. We will see how. We are loading here some parameters that we will send to the Storyblok API client to configure the content that we want to retrieve from the Storyblok API. And what we are going to do is here bring all the data related to the story that we are visiting. How we know which story we are visiting? We have here the Storyblok API client that is getting the information related to this story in particular. And the story is the slug that we are visiting. So if we are visiting the home page, this will be stories/home. If we are visiting in our site the about page, you will see that it will be stories/about, as you can see here. If we go to the blog, stories/blog, and etc., etc. I mean, for the articles, it will be blog/traveling to Thailand. And this is what we get as the parameters here in Next.js. This slug will be that URL. So we are able to load all the content and information related to the page of the URL that we are visiting now. When we have this data related to the story, we are returning it to the main function that we saw before. So we have here, I mean, we are returning the story property, which is the data story that is coming from the Storyblok API. And with that, we are going to use the content of the story to load all the components that are inside the story that we are visiting. We have another function here. I mean, again, what I mentioned before is that we are going to use static site generation to generate the static assets ahead of time. I mean, not when the users are visiting our web page, but we are going to generate all the static assets at build time. So the question is how Next.js knows which URLs it has to load to execute this get static props and get the content from the Storyblok API for the URLs. So what we need to do is to generate a list of URLs that will be used at build time to run this get static props function for each one of these URLs in the list, and we will run the main function too for each one of the list. So for our website, we will need a list of URLs at build time that will contain the home page, the blog URL, the about URL, and the URL of each one of these articles. So the question is, how we do that? We use the Storyblok API client again, and we get the CDN links. Doing this, we will get the data, and the data will get a list of links that will be all the pages that we contain on our space in Storyblok. And for each one of these URLs of the stories that are living in a Storyblok, we will add them to a paths list that we will return and we will use in the get static props function. You will be asking probably how we define the URL of the stories in a Storyblok. So I will go here and I will show you that for each one of the pages that we have, if we go to the config tab here, you can define a slug. So the slug of the home page of my website is home. If I go out, you can see that we have an about page too. And the slug of the home page of the about page is about. So we will get all these slugs of all the stories that we have inside our space, and we will generate a list with all the slugs of all these stories. And once that we have the list of all the stories of all the URLs, we will run the get static props function for each one of them, and we will generate the markup for each one of the pages using this main function. This is the dynamic route that will generate all the pages at build time for us. What we need to do now is to create the components that we are going to manage. I will copy the folder, the complete folder of components, and I will show you. We will create a folder called components here, and we have a list of components that we are going to manage in our space. I will show you one of them, some of them. We have the, like we have in the home page, we have the teaser. The teaser component is a React component, as you can see here, that will return the markup for the teaser. You can see that here we have the headline of the teaser, and we saw before that we have an image with the file name and the alt text. If I go to the real-time visual editor, you will see that if I click on my teaser, I have the headline and I have my image with the image and an alt text that I can set. If I go to the grid here, you can see that I have a grid component, which is a list of blocks, sorry, a list of columns, as we saw before. The property here is called columns, and these columns is a list of features. And the features, if I go here, you will see that the feature is also a React component that has the markup and that we are using here, for instance, the block name and the block description. So if I go to any of these three blocks that are of type feature, any of them, I can see that we have the name and the description, which are the fields that we are using here to be displayed using the markup of the React components. So I have here, so these divs and these paragraphs that are displaying the name and the description properties, which are the ones that are coming from the API of Storyblok with the structure that we saw here. We have the columns, and as we saw here, we have for each feature, we have the name and the component, the name and the description, which are the ones that we are using, and these components are of type feature. So we are seeing that the dynamic route that we are setting here is loading the same the same dynamic component for any of the routes that we will handle in our space, no matter which type of component we have in the story. So the question is, how do we know which component type we have to render and we have to load and we have to use the fields if it will be the same code to execute for each one of the pages? So now what we are going to see is this dynamic component that I created, which will make more sense. In this dynamic component, we are importing all the React components that we will have in our application. As we saw before, the teaser, the feature, the grid, the ones that we saw before from the code that I have here. I mean, this is the grid component, this is the teaser component, this is the feature component with the markup that we are going to generate. And this dynamic component will create a list linking the component type that is coming from the Storyblok API with the React component that we will going to link to that component type inside the front end of our application. So if I go to the API, to the JSON structure of my story again, you will see that for each one of the components that I'm managing in my, that are coming from the API, I have this component property. And the component, for instance, has teaser value here. And we have here that for the teaser component type, we are going to load the teaser React component from my application. So now if we go to the code itself of this dynamic component, you will see that we are receiving a block inside the dynamic component, which is the block that we are sending here. In this case, it's a story, but it can be a block only instead of having the complete story. And we ask for the component property of that block. If we have a component that has that key in this list, I mean, we ask for the teaser, for example. If we have the teaser value here and we have inside this component list a teaser, the teaser value, we will load or we will return the React component teaser. And we will load the information related to that block. So when we load the home page, for instance, we will load here the dynamic component and we will receive the home page, which is of component type page. We are loading here the page. We have a React component page. And if we go to that component, we will see that we have here the code that I will render for the page that I'm visiting. The page has a body. This body has a list of blocks, as we saw in the real-time visual editor, but we don't know which type of blocks or component we are loading. So we will use the dynamic component here again. And we are using the block information that is coming. So for each one of the components that we have inside the body of our page, we will run this same logic and we will load the teaser, the grid, the feature, and etc. The last thing that I want to show you here in the code, so we see that our application is up and running, is that we are importing here this function from the Storyblok.js package, which is called Storyblok Editable. We will need to execute this Storyblok Editable to the top level HTML element of each one of the React components that we will render. Why? This page component, you can see that we are using it in the main, but for instance, in the teaser, we are loading we are executing the Storyblok editable function at the div. I mean, the top level element that we have in our React component. The same for the feature, we are doing the same here, and the same for the grid. We are doing that on the top level grid that we have. this Storyblok editable function that comes in the Storyblok.js package. This function is the one that will allow us to click on the components inside the visual editor, edit the properties of the value, edit the values of the properties of each one of the components, and be able to see in real time the changes being applied in the Storyblok real-time visual editor. So for each one of the React components that we want to be able to click and load the information and edit it inside the real-time visual editor, we will need to run this function. So I can say that all the code of my application is ready. Let's be sure about that. So if I run npm run build, as we mentioned before, we will generate the static assets of my page, right? So, well, we have a couple of warnings that I will have to review, which are, instead of using the image tag, I should use the next image component, which is something that we can discuss about Next.js. But here you can see that I'm running the Slack dynamic route that we run. And as we saw before, at build time, we are generating the static version of all the pages that we have in our space. Those pages, based on the slugs that we have in our space, are the blog page, the about page, the home page, and each one of the 3 blog articles that I have. You can see that all these pages were generated statically. I mean, these are static pages that we are generating at build time. So we run this build process. We generated the static assets for all the pages. So if I now run npm run start, as we saw before with the home page that Next.js offered us in the initial boilerplate, the start project. If I go now here and I execute localhost and the port 3000, we can see that we are loading the same page that we have, and each one of the pages was generated statically. I mean, this is not being rendered dynamically for each visitor. These are static version of our pages. So you can see how fast we are loading each one of the pages because they were generated ahead of time at build time. So they are available as static pages for all the visitors of our website. And this is kind of the approach that we want to take in Jamstack projects. So if I go now to the Storyblok application, sorry, I will close all of this. We can see that instead of using the URL of the published version of my website, now I can go here to the settings menu and define different preview URLs or locations. What I want to use for the location is to point to my local host to see that effect. I mean that actually the version that I created that is running locally to me in my computer is working. So I will go to the content, to the real-time visual editor, and instead of loading this preview URL, I will load this localhost version. So you can see that we are loading the page and the website from my computer, the static version of the pages that is available. But if I click on them, I can identify the components. And if I go here and I can change the value of the properties of my components and see in real time how the page would look like in the case that I change the properties. So I have now this real-time experience inside Storyblok, and what I'm able to see also is that I'm also generating the static version of the pages. So let me go back, and I want to show you here again that we have the static version of the page. Sorry, I probably changed something here. Yeah. So again, we have the local host. Let's say that now instead of, oh, sorry, probably, oh yeah, it took me some time. I'm going back. So what we are going to do now, do you have any question by now?
I don't see.
Okay.
But
okay,
feel free to write. Yeah, feel free to write or
yeah, please ask any question that you have, because I mean the code of the application is done. What I want to show you now is that I will publish the application in Vercel, so we have it up and running and access it by from anywhere. What I'm going to do now is go to GitHub. In GitHub, what I'm going to do is to create a new repository. I will name this repository CTJS workshop. I will make it public. And this repository that I'm creating, what I'm going to do now is to run these commands, which are always the same, but I already have my project here. I will run git init. I init my Git repository here. I will add all the fields that I changed. I will commit all the changes that I apply with a message that says the first commit. And now that I have all the files that I just updated, what I'm going to do is to create the main branch. In my repository, I will add the remote origin for the repository that I just created. And now, yeah, I will push all the changes that I applied. So now we have all the code that I created in my computer. It's now available on this repository. So if I go to CTJS workshop in my GitHub account, which I will share with you in the case that you want to take a look, you will see there the code I just created. And what I want to do now is to deploy it to Vercel. So I will go to vercel.com. This is the home page of Vercel. You can create an account or log in with GitHub and create a free account because Vercel is free. I mean, one cool thing, I will continue with my GitHub account, but one cool thing about Vercel is that depending on the size of your project, you can have a free version of the platform. So what we are going to do now is to generate a link between Vercel and my project living in GitHub that will automatically deploy all the static assets and make the site available to be visited by anyone. So here I am in my dashboard of my account in Vercel. I will create a new project. I can import a repository from GitHub, and I will import the one that I just created, the CTJS workshop. You can see that Vercel is automatically identifying that this CTJS workshop is a project that is using Next.js. So if I import the project now, the only configuration that I have to set is the name of the project. So I'm naming it CTJS workshop. The framework preset that we are going to use, as I mentioned before, will be Next.js because my project is Next.js. So if I click now on deploy, what we are going to do is linking the GitHub repository between between GitHub and Vercel platform, and Vercel will automatically identify that my project was created using Next.js. It will run the build process to generate all the static assets. You can see here that it's running the npm run build, the one that I run locally. You can see here the same warnings that I got when I was working locally, and it will generate all the static assets for all the pages. Here you can see that the same code that I had when working locally, and I was not able to show you because Vercel is super fast generating the site. So with all this confetti, we can see now that we have a new website up and running in Vercel. So if we go to the dashboard, we can see that it automatically generated URLs for our page. This is the URL, CTJS workshop Vercel. So if I go to this URL, you will see that my site is up and running at this URL that I will share with you. And you can visit it living in Vercel in the platform. And again, what is living is the static assets and the static version of each one of the pages. We are not generating the code dynamically whenever a user visits our web page. We are displaying the static versions of them. So you can visit it now. This is the page that we just created. So congratulations. Do you have any question? We have 5 more minutes for the workshop. if you don't have any other question, I want to show you one scenario that we should handle in our application, but I want to see if there's any question by now.
From what I see, I don't see some questions are being posted.
Okay. So what I want to show you now is a very common scenario that you will face. Here in Storyblok, we have the possibility of, oh, sorry, I will use the published version because I stopped my local server, but we can have the scenario where a content editor comes here and wants to edit the content in the page and be visible for all the people, for all the end users. But the thing is that we need to somehow tell Vercel that whenever we are introducing a change in the content of our space in Storyblok, we have to run this build process again to generate the new static versions of our pages. So how we do that? If we go to Vercel, we can see that we have some settings for our application. And in the settings, we can go to the Git tab here, and we can generate deploy hooks, which is a URL that will trigger a deployment of a certain branch of my repository. So I can create here the deploy hook, let's call it deploy, and let's say that the branch is going to be main, the main branch of my GitHub repository. So if I create this hook, we will receive a URL here that I can copy, and we can go to Storyblok and configure in our space this webhook. So whenever a story is published or unpublished, we will trigger the webhook that we got from Vercel. So if I save now, and we go back to the dashboard here, because I want to show you now that I will go to Storyblok and I will apply a change, let's say. First of all, I want to open the page that you can see. So, I mean, you can see that here, this is the version that I have now of my website deployed. So what I'm going to do now is go to the home page and apply a change. Let's say that instead of my travel blog, I want to here to say NextJS conference. If I save the change, I generate a draft version of my story. But if I publish the change, you can say that the item was published successfully. I will go back now. And if I go to the dashboard in Vercel, you will see that we have a building happening now because, sorry, wrong shortcut, but you will see that here we are executing this deploy task again, that Vercel is running over my main branch. So as the code of my main branch in my repository didn't change, I mean, the code of the application is the same, we are running the build process to generate the static assets using the same code of my main branch in GitHub, but using the new content that is coming from Storyblok. So if I go to the overview tab again, sorry, the overview tab again, yes, you will see that this is now ready. So if I go to my page again, you will see that instead of saying my travel blog, we have here the City.js conference. We run the build process to generate the static assets using the same code of my GitHub repository, but the new changes introduced in the Storyblok platform. So if your editors, if your content creators, your content editors want to introduce changes and create new content for your website, you don't need to do anything from the development side. You don't need the developers to run any build process. You don't need the developers to execute any process, to run a trigger, to change something in the code. That will be automatically done with this webhook that we are triggering from Storyblok based on the content that is being edited or generated by the content editors and being published, of course. So we have here the updated version of our website. Any question? Anything? Any comment that you want to share?
Somehow I don't see, but yeah, we will be glad to hear your comments in a text or afterwards in sharing, I don't know, for example, Twitter, etc.
Exactly. So this was the end of the workshop. I hope that you took note of all the links that Arisa and me share here in the chat. You can go back to the URLs where we are displaying all the details related to the workshop, and you can take a look to it, to the sample repository in GitHub, to the Notion page with all the interesting links that we are sharing. And well, I encourage you to give a chance to the Jamstack to create your blog, to create your website, your test website, and of course, give a chance to Storyblok as a headless CMS and Next.js as a framework. Investigate, play, try it, and let us know your comments. Of course, we are waiting for your feedback. So I hope that you enjoyed this workshop. I hope you learned something new today. And if you want to contact us, as Arisa shared before, you have our Twitter accounts, our emails from Storyblok, and we are here happy to help you with your projects. So thank you very much.
Thank you both. This workshop will be also, it has been recorded, so we will have it on our YouTube channel, and we will. It was streamed on Twitter, so if people check our Twitter page, they can see it there as well. So that's another place they can view it as well. I'll see you both in our conferences, and thank you very much again for doing this. And yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you
very
again.
much.
Yeah, thank you again for
It was
having
nice
us.
to
Have a good
see you.
week.
Yeah.
Yes, you too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.